What if the reason you fall, or sometimes fail to fall, asleep, begins not with a to-do list or a racing thought, but with the quiet way your eyes, ears, and heart arrange the world for you? Picture the room where you lie now. Perhaps there's a mug cooling on the bedside table, its steam long spent. Perhaps you're on a late train, head against the window, city lights smearing into soft lines. Or perhaps you're already tucked under the duvet, the ceiling a gentle dim above you. Notice that sense of being in one place, ordered and continuous, how things sit together as if someone had gently arranged them for you. The world feels whole. It feels like reality. That whole feeling is a careful craft. Your senses do not hand you a perfect photograph of the world. They send fragments, rumors, splinters of evidence. The brain's quiet work is to gather those fragments and make a coherent scene, to stitch, to predict, to smooth. It is this hidden choreography between messenger and curator that whispers you towards rest. If you enjoy these gentle journeys through science, a like and a subscribe help this sleepy channel along. Let me take you slowly through that choreography. I'll be your sleepy scientist, soft-voiced and curious. We will walk sense by sense, and we will look at a few simple illusions and everyday moments that reveal how the brain prefers a tidy story over a literal rendering. By the time we reach the edges of sleep, you may find the world feels kinder for having been understood. Senses as messengers, fragments, not windows. Imagine a lantern held at arm's length in a dark room. The lantern lights a small circle. Everything else is in shadow. Your senses are a lot like that lantern. They cast light on some things and leave other things dim. Vision gives shape and color, but only where the eyes are looking. Hearing supplies rhythm and distance, but only sounds that reach the ears. Touch reports pressure and texture in the places your body meets the world. Smell and taste arrive as fleeting associative notes. Balance and the sense of where your limbs are live mostly inside you. Interoception, the sense of your heartbeat, your breath, your stomach, speaks in slow internal pulses. These messengers are noisy, they are imprecise. The blind spot in your eye, the gaps between saccades when your gaze darts, the whispers of distant footsteps, all of these are incomplete threats. Predictive processing is the idea that the brain does not wait passively for a flawless feed. Instead, it anticipates. It forms expectations, lightweight models of what will be sensed, and compares the incoming fragments to those expectations. When the fragments fit the model, perception is smooth and effortless. When they don't, the brain updates the model, or sometimes creates a little surprise. The prediction is like a lantern's beam carried ahead of you, illuminating what is most likely to be there.
The senses are the hands that check the furniture as you enter a dark room. Together, they make a convincing, comfortable scene. Vision, the mind's painter. Look at a straight line now, with a small dot beside it. Even without looking directly, you don't feel the line fall apart when your gaze drifts. That steadiness is the brain painting continuity across the blind spot, that tiny portion of the retina where the optic nerve leaves the eye and receives no information. Rather than offering a hole in experience, the brain fills it in with the most plausible continuation. It is not guessing wildly. It is using context, past experience, and expectations about solidity to make an invisible patch appear visible. If you've ever held a cup of warm tea and watched steam rise, then looked away and back, you may have noticed that colors and forms seem unchanged despite the tiny jumps your eyes make every few hundred milliseconds. These jumps are called saccades. You might expect that the world would appear jerky or fragmented as your eyes hop from point to point, but the brain stitches these instants into a continuous scene. Color constancy performs a similar kindness. A red apple remains red whether it sits in noon sun or the dimness of evening, because the brain discounts shifts in lighting to preserve object identity. This is not delusion, it is practical generosity. The world remains recognizable, stable, predictable. Visual illusions make the brain's rules visible. Consider the Mueller-Lyer illusion. Two lines of equal length appear unequal because small arrowheads change the context. The brain applies rules about depth and perspective, and those rules influence perception. A checkerboard with a shadow cast across it seems to contain different shades of gray, even when two squares are the same tone. The brain infers illumination and corrects for it, prioritizing a lasting understanding over pixel-perfect truth. Such corrections save energy. Rather than constantly recalibrating for minute changes in light and angle, the brain assumes continuity. That assumption carries you through the day with a reassuring steadiness, and it carries you into the first gates of sleep by reducing the sensory labor required to maintain a coherent scene. Hearing, continuity in time. If vision stitches across space, hearing stitches across time. Sounds arrive as waveform after waveform. The brain's task is to turn those waves into coherent objects, a voice, a train, the rain on a roof. One of the clearest demonstrations of the brain's constructive tendencies comes from speech. In a noisy room, when parts of a sentence are masked by other sounds, you often still hear the missing phonemes as if they were present. This is called phonemic restoration. Your brain fills in a missing consonant or vowel using context and expectation, so the sentence remains senseful.
Then there are illusions like the shepherd tone, a sequence that seems to ascend forever, yet never quite reaches a higher pitch. The effect plays a trick by arranging overlapping tones in a carefully weighted loop. The brain, designed to detect rising pitch as motion or urgency, is lulled into a sensation of endless ascent. It's not that the ear fails, it's that the auditory system and the predictive machinery inside the brain prefer a coherent narrative incline and will accept the illusion to preserve the story. Another simple, everyday example, speak perception is not purely acoustic. Watch someone speak quietly, and the visual information of lip movement will influence what you believe you heard. That is the McGurk effect, a mismatch between heard syllables and lip movements that produces a third, fused perception. The brain fuses sight and sound to produce a single, consistent interpretation of who is saying what. This fusion is economical and stabilizing. It reduces ambiguity by favoring the most coherent cross-sensory account. Touch, body as a map. Touch is immediate and intimate, the sense that anchors us in a body. Our skin reports pressure, temperature, and texture. But even here, the brain does not simply record. It negotiates ownership and location. The rubber hand illusion beautifully demonstrates this. If a person's real hand is hidden and a fake hand is stroked in unison with their hidden one, the brain can adopt the fake hand as part of the body. The brain prefers a coherent story where sight, touch, and proprioception, the sense of limb position, line up. When they line up, even falsely, the brain revises its map of the self. Phantom limb phenomena show the same willingness to maintain continuity. After amputation, a person may still feel a missing limb. That is not fantasy. It is the persistence of the body map and the predictive machinery that expects the limb to be there. Pain, too, is interpretive. Nociceptors signal potential tissue damage, but the feeling of pain depends on context and expectation. When the brain predicts danger, the signal may be amplified. When it predicts safety, the same signal can dissipate. The sense of touch as negotiated story matters because, as you prepare for sleep, the brain uses this same map to lower vigilance around the body. Warmth, support from a mattress, a gentle blanket, these are cues that the body map can trust. The limbs are safe, the surface is stable. The brain can then afford to downweight touch signals that would otherwise demand attention. Smell and taste, memory and expectation. Smell and taste are often described as intimate senses because they link so directly to memory and emotion. A single inhalation can summer a childhood kitchen or an autumn field. That immediacy is partly because olfactory signals bypass some of the usual cortical way stations and feed into older brain regions involved in affect and memory.
Retronsole olfaction, where molecules travel from the mouth to the nasal cavity as we chew and exhale, is a key player in flavor. What you taste is not merely what your taste buds report, it is what the olfactory system, memory, and expectancy conspire to produce. Expectation shapes flavor strongly. If you have been told a wine is expensive, you may perceive finer notes than if you believe it was a cheap bottle. The brain's predictions about value and identity color the raw input. That is not deception so much as economizing. The brain uses prior knowledge to interpret ambiguous chemical signals. At night, a stable, familiar smell, the soap on your pillow, the faint trace of a favorite tea, can help the brain tag an environment as predictable and known, which may reduce sensory surprise and make the descent into sleep feel less precarious. Balance and proprioception, the orchestra of motion. Balance resides in the inner ear, within tiny fluid-filled canals that sense angular movement, along with otolith organs that detect linear acceleration. Proprioception, meanwhile, is a network of receptors in muscles and joints that tell the brain where your limbs are without looking. Together, they build a sense of dynamic self in space. Motion sickness is a good example of what happens when these systems argue. If the inner ear signals movement while the eyes report a stable horizon, think of a ferry cabin where you read but your inner ear tells you you are swaying, the brain confronts a mismatch.
The predictive model that usually keeps motion and vision aligned is violated, and that surprise can translate into nausea. The brain prefers coherence. When coherence breaks, the body protests. Importantly, the brain also weights these inputs depending on context. In darkness, the brain relies more on vestibular and proprioceptive cues. In bright daylight, vision often dominates. This dynamic weighting is key. The brain is not simply summing senses, it is deciding which messenger is most trustworthy in the moment and letting that messenger lead the narrative. Interoception, the internal weather. Interoception is the sense of the body's inner state: heartbeat, breath, gut tension, thirst, the slow swell of fatigue. These signals are quieter and slower than a glance or a clap, but they steer mood and readiness in profound ways. A steady breath may convey calm, a fluttering heart may whisper alarm. The brain does not simply notice these signals, it interprets them, bringing feeling and emotion into being. When you lie down and begin to notice breath and heartbeat, the brain integrates those rhythms into the broader scene. If breathing is steady and the heart is unconcerned, the brain's model of safety becomes easier to maintain. If interoceptive signals are erratic, perhaps after a stressful conversation or heavy exercise, the brain interprets them as potential threats and holds sensory gates a little wider open.
That widened gate invites more external surprises and can make falling asleep feel more difficult. Illusions as clues to the brain's rulebook. Those illusions and mismatches we have just visited do more than entertain. They expose the brain's operating principles. When the brain fills in a blind spot, completes a masked phoneme, or adopts a rubber hand, it is following a handful of rules. Favor continuity, prefer parsimonious explanations, integrate multiple sources into a unified account, and prioritize predictions that make the world easier to navigate. We can see this at work in multisensory illusions. The McGurk effect shows how vision and audition will fuse into a single percept when they are temporally aligned. The ventriloquist's art performs a similar trick. When a puppet's mouth and a voice are synchronized, sight yields to expectation and the voice seems to come from the puppet. The brain privileges a coherent, plausible story over precise accuracy. It prefers fewer surprises. These rules are not flaws, they are adaptive shortcuts that evolved because they saved time and energy. In the moments when prediction and signal align, the brain can reduce active processing. It can rest a little. Over the course of the day, that reduction in processing is cumulative. The less surprise the brain meets, the fewer corrections it must make, and the less metabolic effort it expends. Individuality, why your perception is your own. Although the brain follows similar rules across people, the particular predictions it makes depend on history. Memory, culture, language, early experience, genetic variation, each of these shapes the priors the brain favors. That is why two people can look at the same painting and notice different things, or why one person's favorite sound is another's small irritation. Expectations sculpt perception in ways both subtle and profound. Recognizing this individuality matters for sleep too. Some people are more startled by small nocturnal noises, others scarcely register them. Some minds favor vigilance, others favor ease. None of these traits is a moral failing. They are variations in the weighting of prior expectations and sensory trust. The brain that is most efficient at filtering may rest more readily because fewer sensory surprises break the calm. The brain that errs on the side of caution may be more sensitive to change and therefore need a gentler path into sleep. Multisensory integration, the brain's meeting room. When senses align, perception feels effortless. The brain organizes that alignment through multisensory integration, a process by which inputs are weighted and merged according to their reliability and relevance. If vision is clear and stable, the brain will let it guide spatial judgments. If vision is unreliable, vestibular or proprioceptive cues may take precedence. The integration reduces redundancy and produces a single, coherent experience.
Consider a simple evening. You sit on the sofa, a mug in your hands, a familiar song playing. The sight of the room, the warmth on your palms, the low hum of the melody, the smell of brewing tea, all these signals arrive in staggered time from different receptors and pathways. The brain matches them against its expectations. This couch is usually here. That cup is warm. That tune accompanies relaxation. Because the evidence and the priors agree, the brain allows itself to downplay minor deviations. The result is a stable, safe-feeling scene. That stability is fertile ground for the brain to begin lowering its sensory weight. Many gambits of attention and prediction. Throughout the day, the brain runs tiny experiments. It predicts, checks, adjusts. If your foot brushes the carpet and nothing sharp intrudes, the brain learns to expect the carpet's softness and can filter similar signals more readily next time.
If you walk into a silent room and a telephone rings unexpectedly, the prediction fails, and the brain allocates more resources to resolve the discrepancy. These micro-adjustments are efficient. They help maintain a continuity of self and scene without forcing your conscious mind to catalog every minor variation. Sleep, in a sense, is a large-scale extension of the same strategy. The brain reduces the weight of certain sensory channels, leans more heavily on its top-down models, and lets continuity hold the scene together so internal restoration can proceed. A soft bridge toward night. Now imagine that same cozy scene as dusk deepens. Light levels fall, colors lose saturation, and the world's edges soften. Auditory scenes often become simpler. Background chatter fades, distant engines go still. Your breath and heart slow by a few beats. These are not dramatic changes. They are gentle nudges that alter the balance between the messages that arrive and the predictions that guide them. As evening settles, the brain's reliance on priors, those neat, efficient models, quietly increases. It will tolerate a bit more ambiguity because maintaining a whole, continuous story is less costly than labeling every micro-variation. The lantern carries a steadier beam. Visual flicker and small sounds are treated with less urgency. Interoceptive rhythms, a calm breath, a regular heartbeat, provide internal anchoring. The brain, favoring continuity and economy, can afford to let external signals fall into the background. All of these shifts are incremental and subtle. They do not guarantee sleep. They do not offer a cure for chronic sleeplessness. What they do is change the weights by which the brain balances the noisy world. They make it easier for the nervous system to enter a state in which repair feels possible. There is a tender irony here. The same mechanisms that help you navigate a bustling day, prediction, smoothing, integration, are reoriented at night to reduce sensory labor and protect internal stability.
The brain that was once a bustling curator of sharp detail loosens its grip, letting scenes blur into patterns that can be carried into the quieter architecture of sleep. And yet, the transition from day to night is not identical for everyone. For some, the brain's priors are shaped by frequent unpredictability, and so the gate to rest remains wider open, scanning for signals. For others, life's steadiness has allowed the brain's models to become very confident. Small deviations are easily absorbed, and sleep tends to come more readily. Neither is better in moral terms. They are different balances struck over a lifetime. At the edge of the night, there is also emotion to consider. Interoception feeds mood. A tightening in the chest after a difficult conversation will alter the predictions and raise the sensory threshold. Conversely, a sense of contentment can steady interoceptive signals and smooth the path. The brain does not segregate the inner world from the outer, it weaves them together. That weave is what you bring to bed. As the room grows still and your attention narrows, the weight of external noise lessens. The brain's lantern shifts from scanning to maintaining. It depends more on the internal map and less on rapid checking. This shift in weighting is the hidden link between how your senses work and how you move towards sleep. By reducing surprise and favoring continuity, the brain can lower its active processing and permit restorative dynamics. You might notice even now how certain little cues help that reweighting. A steady, predictable sound like a fan or a distant hum is easier for the brain to ignore than sporadic clanks. A familiar scent can anchor a scene as known rather than novel. A warm surface under you confirms the body map. These are not guarantees. Rather, they are the same kinds of tendentious favors the brain gives to perceptions it can predict. At this point, if you are lying quiet, you may feel the edges of your awareness drawing inward, like curtains being gently closed. The world does not vanish. It becomes a softer, more predictable pattern against which the brain can apply its smoothing operations. The mind's lantern dims, yet becomes steadier. The messengers, eyes, ears, skin, nose, inner signals, continue to deliver fragments, but the curator is more willing to accept the least surprising story. There is more to say about how this reweighting deepens, how consolidation and the brain's restorative cycles are connected to the same predictive apparatus we have been tracing. There are subtleties about timing, about the rise and fall of particular rhythms, and about why some nights feel more resistant than others. For now, notice the small ways your present sensations are already arranged, the soft heft of the duvet, the steadiness of your breathing, the dim outline of the room. Each small predictable signal is a friendly cue to the brain's modeler.
If this reflection has steadied you, and you would like more gentle explorations into how mind and body meet, subscribe and tap the bell for the next calm exploration. And now, let your senses soften. As your senses soften, they do something small and generous. They begin to share less, not more. Where once they offered hurried, tentative dispatches, they now deliver fewer surprises. The chatter quietens. The brain, which has been listening all day, leans into that quiet and, almost imperceptibly, changes strategy. It tolerates a little more ambiguity, and in return, it gives you back a steadier, warmer inner scene. If you give this a moment, you might notice how the tempo of sensing shifts. Details you would have noticed in the afternoon, the precise color of the bedside book, the faint tick of a distant clock, hold less sway. The brain's appetite for constant checking diminishes. Prediction, that gentle lantern we spoke of earlier, broadens its sweep. Where it once probed for minutiae, it now sketches the room with softer strokes. That shift is subtle, but over the course of the night it accumulates into something quite profound: reduced sensory labor and the possibility of deep restoration. There are rhythms here to observe, not the kind of rhythms we name and measure in the lab, but the lived, felt rhythms of breathing, of the lazy rise and fall of the chest, of the slow settling of muscles. These rhythms are the scaffolding upon which the brain hangs its nightly story. When breath and pulse are steady, the brain's internal models find it easier to assume safety. When they are ragged, the models keep doors ajar, in case a signal demands attention. In that way, interoception, the sense of your own internal weather, plays a starring role. It is a slow, insistently intimate messenger. It brings news of contentment or alarm, and the brain uses that news to decide how brightly to shine the lantern. Consider for a moment the bridge between prediction and restoration. During waking hours, predictive work is often economical and external. The brain anticipates traffic sounds, the shape of a doorway as you walk, the cadence of a voice. At night, that forward-looking process is repurposed. Predictions are asked to keep the scene coherent with less input. The brain downweights noisy channels. It allows certain senses to take a back seat. It leans more heavily on priors, the learned expectations that have been built across years of mornings and evenings. The result is a kind of neural thrift, fewer surprise corrections, and therefore less metabolic fuss. It is not a magic switch, nor is it a guarantee. It is a tendency, a reallocation of attention and energy that supports the deeper work the brain does in sleep: consolidation, repair, and the slow play of memory. Memory deserves a gentle mention here, because the same predictive machinery that smooths perception during quiet hours is involved in how we reorganize experience overnight.
While you rest, fragments of the day, sights, sounds, feelings, are replayed and resorted. The brain tests hypotheses about what mattered, what can be compressed into a neat rule, and what should be kept vivid. Dreaming, in its own soft and odd way, can be read as a rehearsal of predictions, composing scenarios, running social routines, exploring possibilities without the immediate cost of action. These nocturnal rehearsals help the brain refine its models, so that when morning comes, perception is a touch more economical, a touch more ready. You might find it comforting to imagine this as a gentle housekeeping, drawers of the day being tidied, little notes placed onto shelves, some pages placed into long-term memory, while others are thinned and filed away. The brain is not judging, it is economizing, it is setting priorities for the next day's lantern. We've touched upon how prediction favors continuity and reduces surprise. Now let us look at the trade-offs that come with that favor. The brain evolved to be fast and frugal rather than photorealistic. That is a pragmatic choice. Speed and useful action trump literal detail, because in most ancestral contexts, a quick, good enough read of the world served survival well. But the side effect is that sometimes the brain's shortcuts are visible as quirks, illusions, misperceptions, or odd emotional casts. A rustle in the dark may be interpreted as a rustling branch or a footstep, depending on prior experience. That ambiguity is part of why some nights feel easier than others. A mind tuned by frequent unpredictability will keep more gates open. A life marked by predictable routines will tend to let those gates close more readily. Neither state is morally superior. They are adaptive responses to different histories. Let us return to touch and body mapping for a while, because the sense of bodily safety is one of the most reliable colleagues the brain has when it comes to sleep. When your limbs feel supported, when there is no sharp pressure to demand attention, the body map need not be revised. The brain can therefore relax certain monitoring functions. That is why warmth and physical steadiness are often associated with ease of falling asleep. A warm blanket or a mattress that holds familiar contours offers consistent input. Consistent input can be trusted, and trust lets predictive machinery rest.
There is a delicate dance between comfort and vigilance in the tactile sphere. A slight itch, a new crease in a pillow, a too bright cuff on a sleeve may tug at the map. For some, those tiny discrepancies will spark a cascade of checking and adjustment. For others, they will be absorbed as trivial variations. Those differences are expressions of how the brain has weighted its priors over a lifetime. That is also why your own bedtime rituals, the way you crease a pillow, the exact spot you place a mug, become useful. They form predictable patterns the brain can rely upon.
Hearing, too, plays a nuanced role at night. Some sounds are intrinsically easier for the brain to accept as background. The soft, continuous whir of a fan, the distant hum of a city that has settled into a constant low note. These sounds provide a predictable acoustic bed upon which the brain can overlay its priors. Sporadic, sharp noises, a record sliding on a shelf, an unexpected shutter, are more likely to tax the predictive apparatus because they are less easy to slot into an expected pattern. That is why many people find steady, low-level noise more forgiving than sudden clatter. Again, this is not a rule for everyone, only a general tendency grounded in how prediction and surprise interact. Balance and motion present their own rhythms and mismatches. Think of drifting in a car on a long road, the body rocking gently as outside landscapes blur. The vestibular apparatus and the eyes negotiate who leads the narrative. When they agree, when the horizon moves as the body feels it should, the brain settles. When they disagree, it protests. The brain's solution is to reweigh. If visual cues are absent or unreliable, vestibular and proprioceptive signals step up. This dynamic weighing is part of the night's choreography too. It means that lying still, with a stable head position and minimal motion, reduces the need for recalibration. Smell and taste are quieter partners in the descent to sleep, but their influence is no less profound. The sense of a familiar home, that trace of laundry detergent, the faint presence of a book's paper, help the brain label the environment as known. Expectation colors olfactory perception strongly. A soothing aroma can be read as a marker of continuity, and that marker contributes to the brain's comfort with letting the lantern narrow. However, as with other senses, scent is idiosyncratic. What calms one person may be distracting to another. Cultural associations and personal memory give smells unique valence, and the brain consults those associations when deciding whether to remain alert or to allow rest. Let us speak now of the nights that resist. It is important to treat resistance with kindness. Sleeplessness is rarely a moral failing. It is usually the sensible outcome of a brain that judges the environment or internal signals as potentially unreliable. A racing heart after an upsetting phone call, a jittery caffeine-laced evening, or a mind rehearsing tomorrow's uncertainties all deliver compelling interoceptive messages. The brain, honoring its job of vigilance, keeps gates wider. In such states, the same predictive machinery that ordinarily reduces labor continues to check for anomalies. The result is a lived experience of alertness. Understanding that allows for a different relationship to sleeplessness.
Rather than battling the resistance with frustration, one might tend to the signals. Reassure the body with steady breathing, lower the volume of unfamiliar sensory inputs, or simply notice the sensations without escalating them. That noticing is not a demand to sleep. It is an offering of benign attention that, for some people, gradually shifts the internal narrative from alarm to acceptance. Again, this is not a guarantee. It is merely an account of how predictive weighting and interoceptive tone can influence readiness. We should touch briefly and gently on dreams and the curious role they play. Dreaming is one expression of the brain's predictive imagination. In dreams, priors and memories are recombined, often in strange ways, to simulate scenarios. This may serve multiple purposes: testing hypotheses, consolidating emotional experiences, or simply allowing psychological content to move through the mind without the immediate constraints of waking action. Dreams can feel bizarre or tender, frightening or consoling. Because they arise from the same predictive apparatus that structures waking perception, they are, in a way, continuations of the lantern's work, experiments run in a safer theater. An evolutionary angle helps make sense of these processes without making them mysterious. Prediction is efficient. If a brain can accurately anticipate a noisy path ahead, it conserves energy and acts faster. Over generations, systems that balanced speed with acceptable error likely conferred advantage. The present-day result is a nervous system that trades immaculate recording for workable anticipation. That trade-off shapes both perception and sleep. The same economy that makes rapid, useful inferences also allows the system to downregulate at night. The capacity to enter a state of lowered sensory labor is as adaptive as the capacity to be alert when necessary.
Yet evolution also left us individual differences. Genetic variation, childhood patterns, cultural practices, and life events all sculpt the priors a brain favors. The culture one grows up in may prize quiet evenings and predictable rituals, encouraging models that favor closure at night. A background of unpredictability, frequent moves, irregular schedules, tunes a brain to be alert for anomalies. That variety explains why sleep strategies are not one-size-fits-all. A practice that is soothing for one person might feel constraining or dull to another. Honor these differences. They are the brain's way of being faithful to its history. At a practical, observational level, there are small habits that many people report as helpful because they align with how prediction and sensory weighting operate. Predictable evening routines create a scaffold of priors the brain can use, the same order of actions, the same familiar sense, the same soft sounds.
Regularity in light exposure across the day supports a differentiation between wake and rest, giving the lantern a clearer cue about when to narrow. Slow, steady breathing provides interoceptive signals that are easy for the brain to interpret as safety. All of these tendencies are gentle helpers, not commands. They are ways of presenting the brain with inputs it finds easy to trust. Within the shelter of those tendencies, the brain can enact downscaling. Downscaling is a way of describing how the system reduces the intensity of ongoing sensory prediction errors, simplifies representations, and permits internal maintenance. It is an economy of attention. Circuits that were busy correcting and updating can take time to recalibrate and consolidate. During these periods, you may notice moments of vivid dream, then deeper slow states, then a return to lighter sleep, a cycle that, in its repetition, supports learning and repair. If you find yourself awake at night, one hopeful thought is this: wakefulness does not mean the predictive apparatus has failed, it means it is still engaged in a necessary task. The brain is being prudent. Sometimes wakefulness offers an opportunity to gently shift the internal conversation. Instead of fighting the signals with strained effort, you might imagine offering them a calm narrative. The breath is regular, the body is supported, the environment is familiar. That narrative is itself a form of prediction sent from the top down, and if it is credible enough, it may be accepted. We might also speak of small rituals that aid the brain in accepting such narratives. A brief, familiar routine before bed, making a modest cup of chamomile tea, placing a favorite book on the nightstand, adjusting the duvet just so, is not magic. It is an act of providing predictable inputs to a nervous system that values continuity. These rituals accrue as priors over time. The brain, recognizing the pattern, learns that this sequence often precedes rest. The more consistent the pattern, the more the model trusts it. Over weeks and months, these small givens can become robust cues, easing the nightly transition. A cautionary note is appropriate. Do not conceive of these suggestions as prescriptions that will certainly cure chronic sleep problems. They are alignments with a system's tendencies. Where sleeplessness is persistent and profoundly disruptive, professional help may be needed. Our discussion here seeks to illuminate rather than to medicalize, to offer understanding that can soften the emotional charge around wakefulness. Returning to a kinder kind of curiosity may itself be restful. Instead of treating the mind like an opponent to be conquered, imagine watching the lantern's light from a distance. Notice the soft sweep of attention, the tiny corrections the brain makes, the way a remembered melody threads its way into the dreaming mind.
Curiosity reduces drama because it enlarges perspective. A curious mind can witness surprise without being overwhelmed by it. This stance is itself a top-down prediction, that anomalies are tolerable, that the system can manage without panic. As you settle, you may find fragments of the day arriving like postcards, a burst of color, a short phrase of a conversation, a flash of movement. These are the raw materials the brain will catalog. Some will be stored, some will be woven into dreams, some will be let go. The act of noticing them gently, naming them if you like, but without clinging, can help the brain catalog them more readily. It is not an exercise in control, it is a polite handing of information to the curatorial system. There is, finally, a comfort in acknowledging that perception is a crafted refuge.
The brain's constructions are not betrayals of reality. They are careful edits intended to keep you functional, safe, and oriented. Understanding that can change how you relate to the sensations that sometimes resist sleep. You can treat those sensations as signals from a system doing its job, rather than as enemies to be suppressed. With that perspective, the nightly descent becomes less an ordeal and more a collaborative act. You present predictable cues, the brain narrows its lantern, and together you reserve time for restoration. Allow one last image to accompany you as you drift. Picture a quiet conservatory at dusk. Outside, the last light softens the leaves. Inside, a single lamp throws a warm circle onto a table. The conservatory's panes are slightly frosted with evening air, and the room feels contained but not sealed, a familiar, trusted space. You sit in a comfortable chair, a soft cloth at your shoulder, and the subtle patterns of breathing and heart provide a gentle metronome. The senses send their usual messages: warmth, the book's weight, a faint aroma of tea. The brain, noticing the lack of surprise and the steadiness of the scene, relaxes its checking. Its lantern dims not because the world is less real, but because there is less need to check reality at every turn. In that dimmer light, the mind is free to turn inward, to tidy and to dream. The work of the day is archived. The work of the night begins. If your thoughts are still present, let them be like clouds passing across that conservatory sky. Notice them and let them slide on. The brain will take its cues from what it finds here: steady rhythms, familiar signals, and a lack of sudden novelty. Those are the conditions under which prediction can be most generous. They do not promise, but they predispose. Let your eyes relax if they are open. Let the muscles around your jaw and brow soften. Let the breath be even and without force. Trust for a moment in the quiet competence of your own mind. It has been a careful curator all day. Now it only needs some small help to shift into restoration. May the lantern carry you gently.
May your senses, in their softening, create a pattern the brain can keep. May the night be a kind, patient place where prediction and memory can do their quiet work. Rest when you will. The brain will meet you there.